Welcome to Meadowlarkers 75. 75. Goodness, that's like a diamond anniversary or something, isn't it? I think that's what
Yeah,
it's
it's
called.
not
Yes, yes, yes.
insignificant.
Not insignificant. 75 shows. We have our usuals. We've got Amin Elhassan repping Chelsea, if my eyes don't deceive me.
I do not.
And Kate Fagan repping Puma. Is that Puma I
It's
see?
it's a Puma a me collab,
Do you
a
have a
Paris
do,
brand.
do you have an endorsement deal with Puma?
I just love Puma. They're really good to me. So I have good relationships with people at Puma. And yeah, because I did send you a little something, Howard.
You sure did. You sure did. And
Yeah.
I'm so happy to discuss it one of these days because it's still boxed. I haven't taken them out.
Yeah.
I'm
I mean, are you
serious.
somebody who keeps your favorite sneakers in a box?
It appears
Nope.
so. He
Reaching
emerges
for a
with a
box,
box
people.
And they're Pumas.
and they're Pumas.
Dang. Oh,
Kate
I like
Fagan
those, the
hit me
Dreamers.
with one of the finest surprise boxes of swag in my entire life.
That's right.
Hop online and take a look at the 50th anniversary Puma commemorative Godfather sneakers. I have
That's
a pair
right.
in my house. You open
Jesus,
the box and on the
Puma.
side it says, I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse. And I was like, what? It was like crazy. I was like, oh, so this is what those young
Oh,
girls felt like when they saw the Beatles and they're going bananas. That was me. Holy shit. No,
these
can't.
are
It was great.
nice.
It was unreal. It's gorgeous. And my neighbor, when I showed him to him, because he's a huge Godfather fan as well, my neighbor Robert, he says, well, when are you going to wear them? And I said, never.
Never.
What are you talking about? They will never be worn, especially here,
Can't
like
sully
during
them.
like mud season. Come on, they will never be worn, but they are on the mantle, um, next to my Daredevil #1, next to a whole lot of other stuff that I hold very dear. Thank you, Kate Fagan,
Yeah, you got it.
for that. We have Meadowlarker 75. We'll get a couple of things out of the way first. Our honorary captains for 75, very easy. So very many 75s. Who would be offended if I don't mention them first? Would it be Howie Long, the Oakland Raider Hall of Famer, or would it be Mean Joe Green, the Pittsburgh Steeler, or the guitar playing World Series champion Barry Zito? San Francisco
Mm.
Giants, Oakland A's, and covered Barry Zito his first day in the big leagues back in 1999, 2000. And all we did was talk about music and John Coltrane and stuff, and it was kind of awesome. I was like, yeah, we're going to get along really well. The 75 that I will submit to this group is the 75 that will lead us into our conversation. 1975 was the last year of the Oakland A's dynasty. It was the year of Peter Seitz and his monumental decision that opened up free agency in baseball and later professional sports, December 20th, 1975. It was the decision that got Reggie Jackson traded to the Baltimore Orioles, and that will be the discussion of our Meadowlarker 75 today. The Reggie documentary titled Reggie. That's it. He is the one namer. He is the Hall of Famer in 1993, who, of course, because he's Reggie, because he's the one namer, was the only player inducted in his year of induction, because Reggie only gets the stage to himself. It is available on Amazon, directed by Alex Stapleton. We have all seen the doc, and good conversation. I really enjoyed this doc in a lot of ways. I am remiss to call them documentaries because it's another of the wave of programs that I refer to them now as showcases. There is no journalism in this. There are only about a handful of people interviewed in it. It's Reggie Jackson looking directly in front of the camera, and then Reggie being the reporter, going and talking to other people in his life, such as Vida Blue and Dave Stewart and Raleigh Fingers and Joe Rudy. And the surprise, as much as I consider myself a Reggie aficionado, did not know he was so close with Julius Erving. Interesting touch there. But yes, it's Reggie appropriately on Reggie talking about Reggie for an hour and 44 minutes. And once again, it feels like it is the wave of how these programs are going. I didn't know what to expect. I got a text from Reggie a year and a half ago that this was on the way. And he was like, and he sent me some material on it, and Braun Studios was one of the producers, and I love Braun's work. Braun, by the way, is not LeBron James. That would be Spring Hill. Braun is its own production company that does great stuff. And I recall one of my favorite movies that they did was, I think it was a Tom Hardy movie, Leave No Trace, where he and his daughter are living out in the woods out in the Pacific Northwest. Terrific movie. So I was really excited about this, and it did not really disappoint. Everyone here has seen it. Who wants to go first? Kate Fagan, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in. I'm almost embarrassed to admit how much of this I didn't know. Considering I grew up in New York, so really my knowledge of Reggie Jackson was very limited to those years with the Yankees and just his postseason performance. And I don't even think, and this is kind of our discussion, I think it ties into a lot of our discussion about ring culture and dynasties that we've had along the way and the way storytelling goes. But and this is my limited perspective, different viewpoint into it, but like, I don't think I understood what the A's were until seeing this doc. Like, I didn't necessarily understand the dynasty that they were. And so there was a lot of it within it that we can get into where I was approaching it from, maybe a little bit younger than a Reggie Jackson, somebody who had watched Reggie Jackson. So all of my knowledge of him is coming from like post-playing career looking back. But the thing I appreciated about this doc, I did appreciate that he was sitting down talking to people like Hank Aaron and like Dr. J. I liked that approach to it. And I also like that even though we did get the Reggie, the famous Reggie at bats in the postseason, it seemed, at least from the outset, that his motivation was something a little bit different than to just honor his playing career. That right from the outset, you get the sense that if the recent Black Lives Matter movement and post George Floyd in sports hadn't happened, he might not have finally taken the plunge on this and worked with, as he says in the beginning, like a lot of trust with a director and with a producer with his story, even while he was still maintaining a lot of control over it by being the driving force within it. But watching this, it reminded me, and I think about this all the time, of like, I was born in 1981 and we are now closer to World War II than we are to 1980. 1981 was closer to World War II than we are to when I was born. And the second we started watching this, I was like, wow, I don't think I really acknowledged how close Reggie Jackson was to Jackie Robinson. And then going on to tell that story. But Amina, please chime in with kind of your opening thoughts. And then Howard, I would love to hear if there was anything in this film besides the Dr. J friendship that you didn't know already.
Yeah.
For me, you're not gonna be lonely on that island. Okay, I'm with you.
Thank you, Amin.
As far as what I know about Reggie Jackson going into this, 3 home runs in a game. Wore number 44. I thought he wore number 44 his whole career. I was surprised to find out that we wore 44, and they don't tell the story in the documentary. I did some extra reading afterward. Like, he wore 44 because originally he wanted 42 to honor Jackie, and someone was wearing 42. He couldn't wear 42, so he put 44 to honor Hank Aaron. What else did I know? I know, the Naked Gun, I must kill the Queen.
The Queen,
right?
That's, of course. And that's not in the movie.
Not in the doc.
And not in the doc.
They couldn't get the footage. Too expensive.
Right. And what else? And a candy bar, because he said if Babe Ruth got his own candy bar, I deserve my own candy bar.
And of course, that's a myth.
It's a myth. Baby Ruths are not named after Babe Ruth. And also, the Reggie bar was a complete disaster and a failure. I guess that's the journalism part of it. Like,
was it?
No, yeah, it didn't. It did not do well.
I used to eat them. They tasted like $100,000 bar.
Oh, they had pretzels in them?
they had all that crunchy stuff in it. They really did taste like $100,000 bar, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm gonna research what is in a Reggie bar.
Reggie still says he has them.
What was?
It's probably still good.
He says he still has a box of them in a freezer. He's got them in a warehouse. I'm like, you've got 50-year-old candy bars in a freezer?
But I guess my thing is like, I learned a lot from an information standpoint, but I was distracted by a lot of things in how this documentary was structured. And I felt like, and Howard, you would be the one to know, but I felt like for much of this documentary, he was Reggie presenting as the character of Reggie Jackson. And there was one moment where I was like, oh, that's the real him. That someone pushed the button and he came out. And it's the part where he's talking about wanting to be in ownership and how he didn't fit. And they cut the question. I can tell. It's one of those things. When you watch enough of these things, you can tell there was a prompt here. Because the question, I believe, was, what do you mean you don't fit? How do you mean? And he loses it. He said, what do you want me to say? Was because I'm black? You want me to say it? I don't feel like I need to say it. It should be already known. When he goes into that little tirade right there, he's not Mr. October anymore. That's actual Reggie Jackson bearing himself for what I believe the first time in this documentary. The first time I was like, that's his authentic self. That's not the rehearsed, manicured presentation. But as I said, Howard, you among us would be the most knowledgeable about. Did you feel that same way, or am I reading that wrong?
No, I felt like I feel like there are a few things in the doc that, the very first thing, whenever I watch a documentary, I watch a film, whatever it is, I always say that the director is asking you to go on a journey with them. And the minute you no longer believe in that ride, then you've lost the movie. The director has lost you. And this was a hard one for me because I know Reggie. I mean, I know him. Reggie Jackson is responsible for my second book, For Juice in the Game. We were on a road trip in 2002 in San Diego, Interleague. And Reggie walked up to the group of writers. It was like 3 p.m. We had just gotten there on Friday evening. And Reggie walked over and he said, and you can never tell with Reggie. He's hilarious. A lot of people hate him because he's got this really dry, horribly sarcastic sense of humor. He's also very funny, but he keeps it to the vest. But he's also Reggie can turn you off in a minute. Like, Reggie is a huge personality that rub a lot of people the wrong way. I remember one time we were sitting there in a group at the World Series, and we were all in a scrum. And anyone who's been to a postseason knows that everybody's just milling around. It's the event, right? And the event is more important than the game at one point before the game starts. And so we're all sitting there milling around, and everyone hasn't seen each other and whatever. And we're all sitting there, and there's Reggie holding court, and another reporter is standing there as well. And while Reggie's talking and he's talking and doing his Reggie thing, in mid-sentence, Reggie stops and he looks at the guy and goes, "Who are you?" And the kid's just sitting there and he goes, "I don't know you. We're talking. I don't know you. Get out," and just expelled him. Out you go.
Wow.
By
Was there
Reggie.
An offense that happened?
No, just didn't know. Reggie. That's just Reggie. When I first met Reggie walked out. I was covering the Yankees. Reggie walked up to me. And he did something that I absolutely fucking hate. I do not like people touching my credential. Okay?
Oh,
don't touch my credential.
Who are you?
And not only that, but he took it and he pulled it. So he's pulling on my neck. And I'm like, motherfucker, what are you doing? Right? And it's Reggie Jackson.
Feel
so
like a leash?
Exactly. Like I'm on a leash. And so you don't, I don't like that. It's just a thing, right? I don't like that, And so Reggie takes it. And he looks at it and it says, Howard Bryant, Bergen record. And he's looking and he doesn't know me. And he's like, so, Jersey. So you couldn't get a job at one of the New York papers? You know, not you couldn't. You mean you weren't good? You're not good enough for the Times or the Daily News or even the Post. You're not good enough for the Post. I can't tell if he's messing with me or not. This is the first interaction I've ever had with this man.
Right.
And Reggie and I have been great for 20 years. But that's the first interaction. He's one of those. Like, you can't tell if he's messing with you or not. And so 2002, he comes over to me, and it's me and George King and Danny Graziano and Anthony McCarron, the whole beat, the Yankee beat back in 02. Yeah. And he looks and he says, hey, when are you fucking guys going to do your jobs? And I'm like, it's 3:00. There's no job yet. The game isn't even, what have we done now, Reggie? What have we done now? He's upset that none of us are writing about steroids. He's like, in 5 years, I'm going to be 22nd on the all-time home run list because of all this shit happening in this game, and none of you were doing anything about it. And that was when I went upstairs and I had the idea to write Juice in the Game.
Wow.
It was all because of him, because he was like, what's that?
Did you know before then that it was an issue, but it just seemed like it was like whispers?
No, by 2002, Barry Bonds had just hit 73 home runs and everybody was laughing. It was like, okay, enough is enough. We all know.
Then were people not writing about it though?
Not writing about it in anywhere near the
not
critically.
I remember like 98, like everyone was like, isn't this awesome?
Isn't this the greatest thing of all time? Sosa, McGuire,
Andro in the locker room.
In the locker. That's
right? Just sitting right there. Yeah.
So in that regard, is the real Reggie in this? But that, so many ways, there are so many Reggies. The thing about Reggie, and I'm glad you brought that up, Amin, is that if you want to understand Reggie Jackson is at his core, he's one of the greatest winners of all time. He's one of those guys who can bend the game to his will because he was that good when he got hot. But the one thing Reggie Jackson lost at was that he never got ownership. That is his greatest pain as a professional. And that is the area where it does come out. But to get to the doc itself, I felt like because the director is really young. I mean, I don't know how old Alex Stapleton is, but she looks really young. Did you see Reggie play? Like, what are you choosing to emphasize? And Kate, I agree with you 100%. I think that where we are right now, and especially where that generation is right now, it's time. They are in the mode of making final statements. Reggie's in his 70s. Reggie's 76 years old now. And it's time. And that I was happy that he did this, because at some point you do want to hear from him. And you can tell that Reggie has been framed by media for so long, and being in the New York media especially, that he wanted to have the floor to himself. And he wanted to do this in his way, on in his terms. Quick story. The sports Emmys were just announced yesterday, and shout out to Meadowlark Media for being nominated for Good Rivals. And I was one of the judges for one of the categories. And I will say it was a great experience, because I've never judged the Emmys before, but everything was the same. Virtually all of the entries were the same. And everything. I was like, so there's a formula here to do this. I was bored by one point, because it seemed like, okay, everyone here knows this is how you win awards. Is everything going to be in slow motion and gauzy, and all of the writing is going to be very stilted? This isn't very good. What I was looking for, and one of the two essays that were submitted, one of the two submissions, the two that I nominated for Emmy consideration, were because they were really, really different. And I understand, that this would be distracting, that some of it was distracting. And I thought that there were some things distracting as well. But I do, to Kate's point, really enjoyed the fact that it was different. It was Reggie talking. It was Reggie trying to, Reggie interviewing Vida Blue and Dave Stewart was kind of interesting. Reggie talking to Dr. J was I just like the fact that it was different from every single documentary that we're starting to see these days.
Yeah. Yes. And no, there's some things, there's some things like, yes, let's be different. Let's be firebrands. And then there's some things like, yeah, these things are the same because
they have to be.
Yeah. And so I'll give you a great example. Hey, Kate, where's Reggie Jackson from? Oh,
that's a good question. Yeah. Right.
They never say.
Yes.
I don't know where. No, they
Alabama.
Don't.
No. That's where Hank Aaron was from. He was from Birmingham, Alabama.
They never say in the documentary, I grew up in this town here in this state. They never say it. Nope. There's one point where he talks about somewhere else. He's like, which wasn't too far from where we were from. That's the closest we got.
Reggie's from Pennsylvania.
I thought it was somewhere in the South.
Yeah.
I thought somewhere in the South. His father's name is Martinez Johnson. I was like, are they Hispanic? There's only one line in there. I'm thinking maybe because he says there's so many lights here. I don't even need to go to Puerto Rico to get a tan this year. So I'm like, is his father part Puerto? I don't know. He briefly mentions his dad was a minor league player and also
Negro League player.
Oh yeah.
And they mentioned that his parents were divorced, that they were divorced.
They didn't mention it. He talks about when, like, the moment his parents split up. He never says divorced or like there's so much stuff that's like I was left overwhelmed with the feeling watching this. Like, I've got to go do more homework.
Yeah, I felt the same. I felt the exact same way. Same way.
And as a viewer, particularly like this is. Because like me and Kate admitted at the beginning of this, like, I'm not super well versed on the life and times of Reggie Jackson. So from that standpoint, I walked away feeling like if I got to pause every 5 seconds to look something up, Google something, or do the X-ray because it was on Amazon, like, that's not a good documentary. That's driving me away from the viewing experience rather than keeping me here, which I guess that was your point earlier, Howard. It's like I got to be.
The director lost you.
They lost me, but they didn't lose me because the subject matter wasn't interesting. They lost me because there was just massive gaps and jumping around without any rhyme or reason. We start talking to Dr. J. Why are we talking to Dr. J?
Yeah.
And we're just sitting there talking about his car and what, it's at 85. Were you born in 85? Were you born in 85? And then, oh yeah, we were good friends. And because he was a good player and I was a good player. I'm like, that's not enough of a reason to have this Dr. J part unless you give me more context, particularly historical context, specific stories. There was none of that. It was just like, look at my friend Dr. J, pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the parts of this where I was just left disappointed, really.
Yeah, because it almost now that you're saying that, I mean, it almost watches like maybe it was supposed to be 2 parts and they were like, let's just do a single doc. I agree that there was a lack of foundational knowledge. Like, all it needed was like another 7 to 8 minutes where we get to know where he's from and a little bit more about his foundational pieces. But I did appreciate going into it as someone, to the point, Howard's point of like, when are you lost on the journey? Going into it, I wanted to watch this because we were going to talk about it, but there was a part of me that was like, Reggie Jackson isn't somebody that I've been trying to learn about, right? Like, there are certain athletes where I'm like, oh, there's a doc on so-and-so. I've actually wanted to know more about them. Reggie has never been that. And when I started to understand, especially in like doing my Google beforehand with some reviews, that like, oh, we're kind of using Reggie Jackson's story to talk about race in baseball and where we are today and where we have been, and like with Curt Flood and everything. I appreciated using Reggie's story to tell that larger story. So I appreciated that. I didn't go into it wanting a 2-hour biography just on Reggie Jackson.
See, I was exactly the opposite, Kate, because I am 13 or 12 and a half years older than you. So I remember Reggie. I mean, like as a baseball fan, Reggie Jackson is a giant. And one of the things that lost me in the doc, and to me, when I try to determine, to Amin's point, as to whether or not the journey you get lost or not, is whether or not the subject matter is still compelling. The subject matter is still compelling. I walk into that doco and this is a 3-parter, especially when I see that Spring Hill and LeBron James's company announced that they're doing a 4-part series on, drumroll, J.R. Smith.
Well, J.R. Smith also on Amazon. Yeah,
exactly. Also, like if J.R. Smith is getting 4 parts, Reggie needs 25 parts.
Yeah.
And so that I do wonder how the sausage was made on this. Reggie Jackson, to me, were the doc what I was looking for as someone who is a Reggie fan, is one of the things that we talk about in baseball so much is how the game doesn't have any superstars. Like there is no baseball equivalent to Pat Mahomes. Or Patrick Mahomes, not his dad. There is no baseball equivalent to Aaron Rodgers or to LeBron James. That sport doesn't have that anymore. Reggie was that guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Reggie, he's a one-namer. I mean, he is a giant in terms of how professional sports are viewed, how professional sports are marketed, how professional sports are sold to the public and to television. He's the guy. He's the guy. He is the first, along with Muhammad Ali, built for television sports superstar.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, he's that.
And he
big.
talks about that. He talks about his teammates didn't want to talk to. I didn't have a problem with talking to the media.
That's right.
There and talking.
And it's really important to remember, because at our stage in life right now, it's not new because it's so common. Transferring a cultural conversation from radio and newspaper to television. It's like today, the fact that everybody uses social media and they watch TV on a phone when we watched it on a television. You know, I mean, that cultural shift is enormous. And it's also enormous that Reggie Jackson is the guy who began this wave of the Black free agent superstar, the hired gun coming to your town. People hated that shit back then. They wanted you to be homegrown, you know, and now, you know, obviously we have super teams and we have players jumping around all the time. It's nothing. But back then, especially a Black player coming into your town who's going to be the highest paid guy, who your team didn't draft, the expectation was championships, that you are really just a commodity. The commodification of professional sports runs through Reggie Jackson, like historically. And this is what I was looking for. And I just felt like the director didn't know enough. I think they just didn't know the material, like how big this guy was.
It felt
and one of the things that what's that?
It felt like the director was going off of Reggie's lead.
Well,
Reggie said it's important for me to talk about this and this. That's what we'll shoot.
Well, true. And one of the other things about Reggie too that you have to remember is I remember messing with Reggie all the time. I said, Reggie, you ruined New York for everybody. And he's like laughing because he knows it's true and he knows where I'm going with this. I said, you have done what everybody else after you has tried and failed to do, which is conquer New York. The free agent money guy who shows up with all the expectations and kicks ass.
Delivers
it. That you came in, and also the conditions that Reggie did it in aren't going to happen again anytime soon, which is the New York Yankees were the greatest dynasty in American professional sports. They had not won a World Series since 1962. The Yankees hadn't even made the play. The year before, they got swept in the World Series, but before that, they hadn't made the playoffs since 1964. So you're dealing with one of the greatest dynasties of all time that had been down and out, and George Steinbrenner had just bought the team for only $10 million, and the Yankees are now valued at $7.1 billion. I mean, so Reggie is the guy who brought this entire thing back. And not only does he bring it back, but he brings it back in an elimination game in New York City in 1977, hits 3 home runs off 3 swings off 3 different pitchers. Not only does he do that, but in his last at-bat in Game 5 in LA, also hit a home run. So he hits 4 home runs off 4 swings, off 4 different pitchers to bring a World Series back to New York City. I was stunned that this was not a bigger piece of the documentary, that this people, and I think this, because I'm a Reggie fan and because that's my childhood, because you remember how big this was and how big baseball was, it left me disappointed because it wasn't bigger. And I'm thinking that we've lost this period of time. Maybe this is going to get lost to history because the people making these films right now and the people watching these films are so young that it's gone.
Yeah. So they didn't mythologize those moments as well as you wanted to be done in this movie.
And they needed to be because, and so I sent Reggie a message. And it's also true that, you know, when you're talking about exploitation and you're talking about like why these players went on strike and why they make the money they make now and all of that, you can run that entire story of labor through Reggie Jackson in that these guys were underpaid and Charlie Finley had a dynasty in Oakland and refused to pay these players. You had Curt Flood who went out and was like, no, enough is enough. And he lost his lawsuit. And, you know, they all believed in 1975 when the Peter Seitz decision was announced that baseball and professional sports were finished, that there's no way the sport could survive with free agency becoming a piece of the game. Obviously, it was in the exact opposite direction. Sports got bigger and bigger and bigger. But this guy is the centerpiece of 3 straight championships in Oakland. I mean, he is one of the great champions in American sports. He's not, you know, and the thing that also hit me, which was really interesting in this doc too, there was something sort of elegiac about it, was that he was the last link to the old man. He's the last baseball link to George Steinbrenner. He's the last link to the old Yankees. And now that he no longer works for the Yankees, the mythology of the Yankees sort of died with Reggie. There's no big bombast anymore. Aaron Judge is a quiet sort of guy. I mean, obviously, you could make an argument that Derek Jeter is the last link to it because that was the last Yankee dynasty. But Derek is sort of estranged from the Yankees. He's not connected to them. He's a Yankee the way Larry Bird is a Celtic. He's not really part of it. So there was a great opportunity there to really build Reggie. And then to your point, I mean, you know, post playing Reggie, it was just, I just thought, at an hour and 44, or however long it was, of course, an hour and 44, because that's Reggie's number. And also, by the way, trivia, not really trivia, but fun fact, Reggie Jackson has something like 6 phone numbers and they all end in 44 or begin in 44.
Well, that was one thing I was going to say, Howard, as you were talking about that, was one place where I thought the doc did fall down. And Amin, I wonder if you felt the same way, was I know the passable amount of information about free agency in baseball and Curt Flood, but I don't know the intricacies of it. And I didn't need this doc to go into everything about that, but it felt like Reggie was in Oakland and he had to swallow whatever contract offer the owner was going to give him. They casually mentioned Curt Flood, but and then all of a sudden free agency is happening and then he's with the Yankees. And it just felt like there were connective tissue between those things.
That's right.
That was missing so that I could understand just living.
Well, he got traded to Baltimore first. Right. But what they really missed, Kate, to that point, which I was like waiting for, was the fact that in baseball during the reserve clause days before free agency, you had to take the offer that the team offered you, or you didn't play. Okay. Now, sitting next to Reggie in one of those scenes is Dave Stewart and Vida Blue. Vida Blue won 24 games for the A's, I think, in 1971. Okay. Yeah. And he's in a contract dispute with Charlie Finley. And so he doesn't sign. And what does he do? He works for a plumbing company because Finley wouldn't meet his demands. Vida Blue, 24-game winner, is working for a plumbing. He's a plumber. Well, he's not a plumber. He's working for a plumbing company. And when he came back, he was never the same player. He was never the same player, and he was never the same person. And if you ask Vida Blue about that time, he would say, I came into baseball full of joy, and the business side of the game took the joy away from me. And so to have Vida sitting right there while they're talking about money in Oakland and everything else, And that story never came up. It was just, to me, it was one of those docs where I'm like, I wish someone had called me and asked me to be a consultant on this one. Like,
I was wondering if you got called. I was like, I want Howard's voice in this doc.
Well, I just think, and it was like, but I get it. I understood Reggie's point of view too, because there are no reporters in this. There's not a single reporter interviewed in this. And that's a stylistic decision, Reggie on Reggie.
Yes and no, because there's, like Kate said, there's things that needed to be explained. So, for instance, I watched the Kurt Flood doc that came out on HBO 15 years ago. Whenever
a well-paid slave, was that what it was called?
I think
that's Brad Snyder's book.
The Kurt Flood story, I think is. But so I'm a little bit more familiar about the whole machinations of that. But obviously, I'm not an expert. A refresher would have been nice. But then they're like, yeah. So then we go to the re-entry draft, and I get picked by Montreal. But the people who like exactly. What's a re-entry draft? What do you mean the people who like you can still bid on you? What's the point of that draft? Like, explain some of this shit for somebody.
That's right.
There was nothing, and I'm just like,
there was a lot of shorthand in that. Either the expectation was you're supposed to know this, or they just missed it.
And like, that's an example of, look, man, like you could say, oh yeah, my dad was a huge Reggie Jackson fan and all that stuff, and I knew all about this stuff, but I find it hard to believe that people who either watched Reggie Jackson play or had parents who passed it down also had them explained to them. So we have this thing called a re-entry draft. No, like, no, man, nobody knows that shit.
Nobody knows it. If you do want to know it, though, I recommend reading John Hellier's fantastic book, Lords of the Realm, the real story, the real history of baseball. It's in there. It's phenomenal. But you're 100% right. And these are the things. And I don't like sounding like I'm trashing a documentary, because I watched the whole thing and I enjoyed it. But yes, when you're watching this, you see what needs to be done. Right. And you see where the things that you can't gloss over. Go ahead, Amin.
Howard, question for you. What's the Thurman Munson situation? Like, they acted like we kind of knew about this big thing about stirring the drink, and they showed like quick, like the actual newspaper clipping, and it was like really quick and just kept moving. I'm like, guys, at least spell it out to me.
You got to, especially that, because that is
I paused it and read the copy on the screen because I mean, that was my hack. I just was like, I don't know enough about this. I'll read the pause documentary. But yeah,
Thurman Munson was the heart of the Yankees. He's the homegrown white superstar who MVP, essentially the captain of the team. And Reggie gets all the big money in free agency. And by the way, remember, free agency is brand new. So,
this is something no one has ever had to deal with before.
And by the way, the reason why there was a re-entry draft and all that was because the Peter Seitz decision in 75 essentially told baseball that the reserve clause is illegal. You can't hold one player to one team for life or make them go work at a plumbing office. But we are not going to give you a framework. I can't tell you. Peter Seitz, as the arbitrator, was like, I can't tell you how to fix this. You guys have to fix it. So go back and figure out what free agency is going to look like. And the original free agent proposal that Major League Baseball gave to the Players Association was that you could become a free agent in 10 years. The average Major League career is like 3 years. You get to become a free agent in 10. So there were all these negotiations of the first, and this is the reason why baseball had gone on strike all those times, because the minute free agency came into play, the owners were trying to get something back. So the first incarnation of it was they did this thing called a re-entry draft, which was every team, if you were the player, you could negotiate with every individual team you wanted to play for, but they got to bid on you. And it was this incredibly convoluted situation that, of course, disappeared very quickly because it made no sense. And that's right. I mean, so this is the sort of, to the bones and the sinews of the story, the joints that sort of have to be put together, which is where journalism actually is very useful.
Which is why, like, 1 hour with Howard Bryant and then using him at 45-second clips to explain some of this stuff would have been very helpful for us.
And so Reggie, I was going to say the other thing about this too that is great is that in here, you got to remember the personality, that here's a guy who comes in and Reggie's the guy built for television, built for cameras and microphones to tell you how good he is. One of the great quotes of all time about the Reggie candy bar came from the late great Catfish Hunter, Reggie's old teammate in Oakland, who's now his teammate with the Yankees, because Catfish was the first free agent guy to get huge money. And when they brought the Reggie bar in, Catfish said something like, so the minute you unwrap it, it tells you how good it is. And so Reggie comes in and Reggie tells you, he's got this quote. Reggie once said, people, and I resonate with people because I represent both the underdog and the overdog in society. He said that sometimes I underestimate the magnitude of me. I mean, these quotes are unbelievable. And so no wonder people, and so if you're Thurman Munson, this guy's on my team, and now he's proclaiming the team as his, and he's having a drink with Fran Healy, one of the reporters, and he's essentially saying, and now Reggie has always said this was off the record, and Fran Healy has always said that it wasn't, and they're having a drink. I think it was in either Lauderdale. I think it was Lauderdale, where the Yankees trained back then. And Reggie's essentially saying, look, because the Yankees went out and got swept the year before by Cincinnati, by the Big Red Machine. They brought me here to do what Thurman couldn't do, something along those lines. And then he said, I'm the straw that stirs the drink. Mm. And then he essentially said, I didn't come to New York to be a star. I brought my star with me. Mm-hmm. This is the type of shit that would enrage people, even today. I mean, that's huge talk.
Sure. But it felt like they insinuated that he said something specifically about Thurman Munson beyond that. Like something about Thurman is bad at stirring the drink or something.
Yes, exactly.
They
he can't stir it. That's right. That's right.
He's not a good enough straw.
The straw wasn't good enough.
I could see why.
Paper straw.
Like you said,
he was a paper straw. He's a metal straw. Metal straws don't work. Neither do paper straws.
Yeah. Wait, but one detail. I mean, maybe Amin knew this. Maybe this is common knowledge, but I thought was interesting to me was like Thurman Munson gave Reggie Jackson his nickname, and it was sort of meant as like
derisive,
a pejorative.
Yeah,
go ask Mr. October.
Go ask Mr. October. Exactly. Right.
So is that common knowledge among?
I didn't know that. I didn't know where that had come from. And here was the other piece about that. What is the other? It was actually funny because he's in the dock. He's on the telephone with him. What is the other derisive nickname that has survived and been turned into an asset? Pete Rose. Charlie Hustle.
Yeah, that was
the veterans gave Charlie Hustle that nickname because they thought he was, he
showing out.
He was showing out. He was brown nosing to the coaches. Yeah. Oh, look at Charlie Hustle over there, right?
Yeah. They also, now that I'm thinking about it, because Pete Rose was on the phone with him, as you mentioned in the beginning of the doc, teasing this idea of whether Reggie Jackson was going to go to the Hall of Fame ceremony in Cooperstown. Seems like maybe 2021, 2022. There seems to have now been no purpose for that phone call. Other than to have Pete Rose's voice in the doc.
Just to say, I know Pete Rose. He's my
because
friend.
we never even tied that loop around whether Reggie went to the Hall of Fame ceremony.
Or even like how long you've known Pete. When's the first time you played Pete? Like, how do you like it was just a lot of like, let's throw that in here. There were two questions that I remember watching, and I'm like, you gotta ask this question. You gotta ask that question. Number one was they talk about that first year the A's go to the World Series and he steals basically first, second, third. First, second, third, and home, which I thought only happened in the movie Major League. I didn't realize that was something that happened in real life, but gets hurt stealing home. And so can't play in the World Series, even though that play got them to the World Series. Can't play in the World Series. They end up winning. I was like, aren't you going to ask him how that felt?
Yeah.
Like it was just like, and then we won. I was like, what? Like that seems to me like.
Well, that's what I meant about the lack of knowledge. It was like, okay.
Well, I didn't know this, and I'm sitting here watching it, and I'm like, that's the first question that like having zero knowledge about the events. That would seem to be the most logical question. You don't even have to know about the sport. All you got to know is that hey, this great competitor, this so-called great competitor, makes it the biggest stage, can't play because he's hurt. His teammates win. There's happiness for them, but like, is there any part of like, shit, man, I wanted to be a part of this. I wanted to be a reason for this. And then the other question was, like I said, they, in passing, mentioned his parents splitting up and 3 of his siblings going with the mom and 3 of his siblings going with the dad. Like, what was that family dynamic like?
Yeah. Yeah.
They just like, and that happened. And that's like, yo, so what was that like being apart from your mom? How far apart did you guys live? Did you see each other? Did the siblings see each other? How much time you spent? Like, was there like a separation anxiety that happened? None of that. Like, just real. And then my dad was a tailor. I'm like, wait a second. I thought you said he was a Negro League ball player. And like, you know, like there's just not a lot. The family, the whole, how he grew up. Again, they mentioned in passing, we lived in a white neighborhood. That's one of the things where I'm like, well, okay, where in the country is this?
And the bike
Not
story.
enough, the bike story,
Yep,
which
bike
I
story.
thought was a powerful, and it is indeed a personality defining story for him, right? When the pain he feels about being blackballed basically out of ownership is the same pain he felt as a 12-year-old having to walk a bike that was offered to him, not even loaned to him, offered to him by a friend. Like, I wanted, like, yo, take us back to that place. Give me the full picture and let's get into
who you are,
of who he is. And it just wasn't enough of that.
Well, and this is one of the things that I think we pay the price for these types of docs. And we're looking for things as journalists and as viewers, we're looking for something a little more than that. One of the other pieces that we haven't talked about is one of the biggest pieces of Reggie Jackson's career, and that was the relationship with Billy Martin. It's very interesting today, obviously, because the manager isn't the face of the front office anymore. Today, it's an analytics game. Today, it's a GM game. You know, the old baseball tropes of the manager, you know, yelling at umpires and, you know, kicking dirt on home plate and having control of your money and all of that. Very, very different. And people don't realize the way that, you know, Billy and Reggie were oil and water, you know, that they really did not like each other. And that dynamic just really wouldn't exist today because the manager and coaches, except football, don't have that level of power. The reason why the NFL is so different than the other sports is because Bill Belichick still controls your money. He can cut you. You know, Joe Mazzulla cannot cut Jason Tatum.
Right.
You know, doesn't have any way of that sort of leverage, no semblance of that leverage. So the relationship between Billy and the three-ring circus between Billy, Reggie, and George Steinbrenner is what created the Bronx Zoo. You know, when people think about the New York Yankees of that time period, huge money, massive dysfunction, probably should have won more, and didn't, all because of those huge dysfunctional personalities. And those are the things where if you lived it, and obviously I remember that stuff really, really well, these things weren't in there. And it just struck me like this could have been so much bigger.
They never quite explained how, like, we get the beginning of the season where Reggie has a lot of friction, both with Thurman Munson and Billy Martin, but like, and then they're hugging in the World Series after homers, which of course winning cures all. But it felt like there was a really quick leap between,
and way too big. Way too big a leap.
Reggie having a lot of racial friction is how it is portrayed, and then hitting homers in the '77 World Series, and it's all gone.
You needed more voices there.
For life.
Yeah, you needed more voices there. Okay, go ahead. I mean,
they win in '78. Billy Martin isn't the manager,
and he got fired in midseason.
No reference at all.
No reference to it.
I mean, that would seem to be even in the context of the friction between Reggie and Billy Martin, it would seem to me that'd be a seminal moment.
Huge moment.
They have to make this decision. It's our superstar or our well-loved manager and all that, and they let the manager go. The final kind of question I have for you, Howard, is epilogue. He leaves the Yankees organization because he feels like his voice isn't being heard. He's just
because they gave Winfield $23 million,
and he ends up going to Houston,
Anaheim. At the end of his
at the end of his career,
post playing.
At the end of his career, as because he feels like his voice isn't being heard or respected the way it should be. Goes to Houston, joins the Astros organization, and apparently he feels very respected there and all that stuff, and speaks very highly of the Astros organization. This does not jibe with what I've heard of and learned of Astros ownership in the wake of their own scandals with cheating. that
Not mentioned.
beyond not mentioned. Like, he makes the owner of the Astros out to be a very noble man.
Mhm.
And I've heard.
Well, and the owner,
publicly,
Jim Crane, didn't take the fall for the cheating scandal. That was the.
Well, well, not only that, he took advantage of it in cutting a bunch of salary for people who had absolutely nothing to do with it. Scouts and all types of like minions, basically people who just good, honest people came to work, did their job, and collected a modest paycheck. They all got swept in this in an effort publicly. Oh yeah, we're cleaning house, but really all it was they were just saving money off the books.
Yeah, and I bet that hit you personally, Amin, because that
absolutely. And so I'm like
that could have been me.
I don't know a whole lot about this dude, but I know he's not this noble race relations bringer together of people that this guy is presenting him as. And it's just, I mean, I get it, that's his current employer, so he can't be like, yeah, my new boss is a piece of shit too, but at least he listens to me. But it was a level of kind of, it was the only time in the documentary I felt like, okay, this feels dishonest. Because for someone who doesn't know anything, so presumably someone who's watching this documentary because it came up on Amazon, and I'm not a huge baseball fan, but I remember this Reggie Jackson guy because he was in The Naked Gun and all that stuff, right? To watch that, you might walk away like, how about that Crane fella? Pretty decent dude. And I'm like, you can't walk away with that.
Yeah, so to this point, Amin, like, let's just crystallize this, and then Howard, I want your opinion. What Amin's talking about is crystallized in the moment with Derek Jeter, where they're leaning on the dugout, and Derek is basically like, the first time, we interacted. I forget exactly what he said to Derek Jeter.
You said that you never tried to hit a home run.
Yeah, and then he's like, so I know you'll lie to my face. And then the next thing he says about Reggie Jackson is, the thing is, you always shoot straight, and I know you'll give it to me straight. And it's like this weird moment in the doc where I'm like, wait, am I getting the straight version? Or like, what version am I getting here? And so Howard, like, I guess to kind of summarize it, seems like Reggie Jackson was somebody who always, at least to the media, it seemed like he was always kind of shooting straight, at least during the 70s. What was your takeaway on that interaction? I thought it was odd to leave in.
I thought it was odd. I thought it was funny. I thought it was very Reggie. Excuse me, because that is Reggie. But once again, I felt like it made me think more and more about the way these projects are being made, that the get is the biggest thing. And then once you get it, what are you going to do with the get? Do you know what to do with the get? There was a lot on the floor here. And I was, in talking to a lot of other friends about this doc, for our generation, there was a lot that never made the doc that should have. And you're right. I mean, the seminal piece of 77 was the fact that Reggie Jackson was cracking up. He was miserable. This was a mistake. He took all of this money, and the way that he brought New York back. But then again, sometimes when I watch these types of docs, it would be like me watching like a doc on Marvel Comics. I was like, maybe I'm just too much inside. I know too much about it, so maybe it's not for me, and it wasn't meant for those types of things, But go ahead, Amin.
I want to go back to the part where Kate said the Jeter conversation, which earlier I said there was only one time when I thought we got the authentic Reggie. I thought that was one too. That was an authentic moment. And you guys said, "Oh, why would they leave that in there?" I'm glad they left it in there because
I'm glad they left it in too.
It helped me understand who Reggie was, because they say, "Oh, he's a straight shooter. He always tells you how it is." No, he'll tell you how it is when it's advantageous to him.
Well, that's right. Reggie still owes me $10, by the way. Reggie still owes me $10.
Hold on, because I want that story. Hold on, but some might say, well, isn't that everybody tells it how it is when it's advantageous to them? Like, no, because sometimes, even though it might be advantageous to you, it is certainly uncomfortable for everyone else. So people, in the name of nicety, in the name of kind of like not being too abrasive, they conceal those truths. Reggie will reveal those truths, but only when they serve him.
Well, and Reggie also has a mean-spirited streak in him. that is hurtful to people. There are a lot of people, like when I watch when the pain of Reggie not getting ownership, I felt that. I remember the Sports Illustrated piece in '87 when, the cover Reggie speaks out on racism and the whole thing. And Reggie wasn't wrong. And this is all happening during the Al Campana stuff as well. Let's not forget that period. Nightline, where Campanas comes out and talks about, hey, black people lack the necessities to be managers and to be coaches. And obviously things began to shift after that. It was its own sort of, reaction. But I also felt this is payback. This is payback for the number of people that do not like you. When Reggie says, I didn't fit, he's right. And he's also right about how racist that room is, and how really racist that room was, and how if you're not part of the club, and how if you they don't look at you if you don't have that type of money, if you're not part of that club, you're a player. There are no ex-players in the history of Major League Baseball that have ever owned a majority stake of a baseball team. You're them. You're the help. And that's how they view you. But I also felt like, once again, because as a journalist, it would have been nice to have some people talk about this and to say on camera, Reggie Jackson didn't get a team because people don't like Reggie Jackson. They really don't like black people, but they also weren't going to let him in the room. That they were going to let somebody else in the room, but it wasn't going to be him, because baseball is one vindictive place. They all have very, very long memories, and they weren't going to give you a team because of all the grief that they feel like you put them through. To the Derek Jeter story, 100%. I felt like the Reggie that you get is the unpredictable Reggie, because Reggie is one of those guys who is hurt. He's wounded by the path of his life, despite all of his successes. He hates the fact that people don't think he's intelligent. He hates the fact that, being black means you're not intelligent. When he was a player, he would remind everybody that he had 160 IQ. I mean, this is important to him. These are the sort of, insecurities that he has.
To be fair, the thing I did like was his attempt, or the documentary's attempt, to weave in those influences and kind of those people that did mean something to him.
And it was a counter to the fact that he's so self-absorbed. He clearly has deference and reverence for who came ahead of him. I'm sorry, who came before him. I'm sorry.
Before him, and I did enjoy that, and trying to tell a story that is bigger than Reggie, a story that involved race relations, and also race relations in general, but also race relations within the sport. Two things before we get out of here. Number one, I don't know when this is dropping. We're recording this on April 12th. April 13th is the 45th anniversary of them throwing those Reggie bars on the field. So it's pretty fitting.
Let's drop tomorrow then. And by the way, those Reggie bars don't have pretzel in them. They're just chocolate, caramel, and peanut. And I'm sorry, I'm saying just. I love chocolate caramel and peanuts. So
if you remember what $100,000 bar tastes like, that's what it used to taste like. If I remember correctly,
$100,000 bar now.
No, they call them $100,000 now, but it used to be $100,000.
$100,000.
Now it's like KFC is KFC, right? It's not Kentucky Fried Chicken anymore. It's like they made it faster.
Yeah, but $100,000 has crisp rice in it, and that's a distinguishing feature.
It really is, because it's crisp. It's like a Nestle Crunch, right?
No crisp rice in the Reggie bar. Maybe it's downfall.
All right, last question. Howard,
wait, no, save it for episode 76 to tease the people at the top about how Howard is owed $10.
$10.
$10. I will tell that story next week. So if nothing else, I think I would consider this doc successful simply because it did give you a fair amount to discuss. It wasn't. It left a lot of things on the floor. It could have been way, way better. I thought it should have been a series. I mean, you could have done it Reggie Jackson 2 or 3-parter. I think it needed an extra episode or so. But I'm glad I saw it, and I'm glad it's out. It is Reggie. It is on Amazon, and it is directed by Alex Stapleton and produced by Braun Studios. Right. For Kate Fagan. For Amin Elhassan, I'm Howard Bryant. We will see you next week on Meadowlarkers 76.